It was February 28, 1942, at Camp Elliott in San Diego, California. Major James Jones stood in a communications room, pencil suspended above paper, watching something that shattered everything he understood about military codes and ciphers. 4 Navajo men stood before him, transmitting battlefield messages in just 20 seconds. Those same messages would take the Army's most sophisticated encryption machines 30 minutes to encode. The words flowing through the radio sounded like nothing he'd ever encountered. Yet these 4 men, recruited from Los Angeles just days earlier, decoded each transmission flawlessly and instantly. Major Jones had devoted 20 years to military communications. He understood codes intimately. He knew ciphers. He understood that broken enemy communications could decide entire wars, and he knew that the Japanese had already cracked virtually every American code system in active use. The Marines were losing the cryptographic battle before the Pacific War had even truly begun. But what unfolded that morning would transform everything. Eventually, 429 Navajo Marines would create the only unbreakable code in modern military history. A code so effective that Japan's chief intelligence officer would later admit they never came anywhere close to breaking it. This extraordinary story doesn't begin in 1942. It started 24 years earlier in October 1918. 8 Choctaw soldiers attached to the American Expeditionary Forces in France were placed on field telephones during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They spoke to one another in their native language. German forces had been intercepting American phone lines and reading every message sent. Suddenly, they went silent. They could pick up the transmissions but couldn't understand a single word. The Choctaw language belonged to the Muskogean linguistic family, found nowhere else on Earth except North America. No German cryptographer had ever encountered it. Those 8 Choctaw signalmen gave American forces a crucial advantage during the final months of the First World War. But military leadership forgot this lesson entirely. The program ended when the war ended. The achievement was filed away and forgotten. Then came December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor revealed a terrifying reality about American military communications. The Japanese were reading American codes almost immediately after they were sent. Japanese intelligence had spent years preparing. Their codebreakers had cracked the gray code, the brown code, and numerous military systems. By early 1942, the crisis had become dire. Japanese forces could intercept American radio messages and break the codes within hours, sometimes just minutes. Worse still, they were using their English abilities to create chaos, broadcasting false orders that set up deadly ambushes. Major Howard Connor, who would later command code talkers at Iwo Jima, described the devastating situation plainly. Every code they employed, the Japanese cracked. Every cipher, every encryption system, every mechanical device fell to their analysis. They possessed brilliant cryptographers and unlimited time to attack American messages. What the military desperately needed was something the Japanese had never encountered, could never anticipate, and could never break even if they captured the equipment. The existing encryption systems were not only vulnerable, they were painfully, fatally slow. The M94 cipher machine required 30 minutes just to encode a 3-line message, another 30 minutes to decode it on the receiving end. In the rapidly moving Pacific battles, such delays often meant death. Enter Philip Johnston. Born in 1892 in Topeka, Kansas, Johnston himself was not Navajo. His parents were missionaries who relocated to the Navajo reservation in Arizona when he was just 4 years old. He grew up immersed in Navajo culture, learning their language, absorbing their way of life. By age 9, he spoke Navajo fluently enough to serve as an interpreter for a Navajo delegation traveling to Washington to advocate for tribal rights. By his teenage years, he was one of perhaps 30 non-Navajo people anywhere in the world who could speak the language with any real proficiency. Johnston had served in World War I, then returned to Los Angeles, where he built a career as a water department engineer. By December 1941, he was 49 years old, comfortably established, distant from his childhood on the reservation. Then, in February 1942, he read a newspaper article describing Army training maneuvers where Native American soldiers had sent messages using their tribal languages. Something clicked. Johnston understood something few Americans could grasp. The Navajo language wasn't simply difficult, it was virtually impossible for outsiders to learn. Navajo belongs to the Athabascan language family. It possesses no alphabet. No written form existed until American missionaries created one in the 1920s. The language relies heavily on tonal qualities, where identical sounds mean completely different things depending on pitch and emphasis. Its syntax bears no resemblance to English, Japanese, German, or any European or Asian language. Johnston knew that during the 1920s and 1930s, Germany and Japan had sent students to study Native American tribes. They had learned Cherokee, Choctaw, and Comanche, but they had never studied Navajo. The reservation was too remote, the language was too complex. The day after reading that article, Johnston walked into the Naval office in Los Angeles. He presented his idea. Use Navajo speakers as radio operators. Let them transmit messages in their native language. The Japanese would never crack it because they had no entry point, no reference material, no pathway into the language. Johnston had 2 weeks to organize a demonstration. He located 4 Navajo volunteers in Los Angeles. On February 27, 1942, Johnston and his volunteers traveled to Camp Elliott. The following morning at 0900 hours, Major Jones and Major General Clayton Vogel assembled in a communications room, along with several skeptical staff officers. Everyone anticipated this demonstration would fail. Johnston positioned 2 of his Navajo volunteers in one room, 2 in another room 50 yards away. He connected them via field telephone. Then he handed the first pair a written message in English. Enemy expected to make tank and dive bomber attack at dawn. The first Navajo man read the message, picked up the telephone receiver and spoke in Navajo. 20 seconds elapsed. The Navajo man in the distant room wrote down the message in English. Enemy tanked dive bomber expected to attack this morning. Virtually identical to the original. The encryption machine would have consumed 60 minutes total and required codebooks vulnerable to capture. Major Vogel immediately wrote a letter to the Marine Corps Commandant. He recommended recruiting 209 Navajo men right away. The letter was dated March 6, 1942. The Corps approved a pilot program for 30 Navajo recruits. If successful, they would expand significantly. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo men boarded a bus at Fort Defiance, Arizona. They traveled to Fort Wingate, New Mexico. Then they were dispatched to Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. These 29 would become the original 29. They completed 7 weeks of standard Marine Corps boot camp. On June 27, 1942, Platoon 382 graduated. They were immediately sent to Camp Elliott for specialized training. Their mission had never been attempted. They had to create a military code using their own language. The challenge was enormous. Military communications required hundreds of specialized terms: tank, submarine, artillery, battalion. The Navajo language contained no words for these modern military concepts. The solution proved brilliant. The code talkers developed 2 types of code. Type 1 was an alphabet system. They assigned Navajo words to each letter of the English alphabet. But instead of using just 1 word per letter, they created multiple words to prevent frequency analysis. The letter A could be represented by Wullachi, meaning ant, or Belasana, meaning apple, or Tsa nil, meaning axe. This prevented Japanese cryptographers from using statistical analysis to break the system. Type 2 was direct word substitution for common military terms. Submarine became Beshlo, meaning ironfish. Battleship became Lotso, meaning whale. Fighter plane became Dahi-Tihi, meaning hummingbird. Bomber became Jaysho, meaning buzzard. The code talkers organized ships and aircraft by their characteristics. Ships were fish because they moved through water. Aircraft were birds because they flew. This system made intuitive sense to Navajo speakers, but would remain completely incomprehensible to outsiders. The original code contained 211 terms. Within months, it had expanded to 411 military vocabulary terms. This final dictionary, combined with the Type 1 alphabet substitution system, created a code of remarkable depth and flexibility. Every term had to be memorized during training. Nothing was written down in the field. By August 1942, The original 29 had completed their training. They had created a fully functional military code using the Navajo language. They could encode, transmit, and decode messages at speeds that amazed their instructors. Code talkers began deploying to combat units in late 1942. The first group was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, fighting at Guadalcanal. On August 7, 1942, the first Navajo code talkers arrived in the combat zone and immediately began their work. Within hours, they were transmitting battlefield communications in their native language over open radio channels. The results astounded Marine commanders. Messages that previously consumed 30 minutes to encode and another 30 minutes to decode now flew across the airwaves in seconds. Artillery coordinates, enemy positions, troop movements, all transmitted instantly in code that no one could break. At Guadalcanal, code talkers worked constantly in the oppressive heat and humidity of the Solomon Islands. They operated from foxholes, command posts, and forward observation positions. Despite these conditions, they maintained perfect accuracy in every transmission. But they encountered unexpected challenges beyond enemy fire. American Marines who had never heard Navajo sometimes mistook the code talkers for Japanese infiltrators. The guttural sounds, the unfamiliar tones, the rapid speech patterns sounded nothing like English. Several code talkers reported being held at gunpoint by fellow Marines who suspected they were enemy soldiers. The solution was straightforward. Each code talker received a bodyguard who would protect them from both enemy fire and friendly fire. The Japanese response to the Navajo transmissions revealed exactly how effective the code was. Japanese radio operators recorded every transmission. They sent the recordings to their cryptographic units for analysis. The results baffled them completely. Japanese intelligence had broken nearly every American military code. They employed thousands of skilled cryptographers. They possessed unlimited time and resources. Yet the Navajo transmissions made absolutely no sense whatsoever. They attempted frequency analysis, the standard method for breaking substitution codes. But the multiple substitutes for each letter defeated this approach completely. They tried comparing messages, searching for repeated phrases. But the Navajo code talkers deliberately varied their transmissions. Japanese intelligence tried linguistic analysis. They assembled every language expert they could locate. None of them recognized these sounds. The language was unlike anything in their experience. The Japanese code name for the Navajo transmissions revealed their frustration. They called it the incomprehensible language. One report stated that the sounds appeared almost inhuman, as if American forces had developed some kind of mechanical speech synthesizer. By late 1942, Japanese commanders were receiving warnings from their intelligence services. The Americans were employing some form of unbreakable code on tactical communications. All decryption attempts had failed. At Tarawa in November 1943, code talkers transmitted and received over 800 messages during the 76-hour battle. Not a single error was recorded. Japanese forces intercepted many of these transmissions, but gained zero intelligence value. At Peleliu in September 1944, code talkers coordinated the entire amphibious assault. They handled all communications between ships, aircraft, and ground forces for 73 days under some of the worst conditions in the Pacific War. But the true test came at Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War was unfolding. 6 Navajo code talkers worked without rest during the first 48 hours of combat. They transmitted over 800 messages in 2 days. Every message arrived in Navajo. Every message was decoded instantly. Every message was completely accurate. Major Howard Connor stated it plainly in his after-action report. Without the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. The Japanese never stopped trying to break the code. Even as their empire crumbled, their cryptographers continued working on the Navajo transmissions. They devoted significant resources to the problem. In one incident that revealed both Japanese determination and the code's strength, a Navajo army soldier named Joe Kiyumiya was captured at Bataan in April 1942. Kiyumiya was Navajo and fluent in the language, but he was not a code talker. He had never been trained in the code. Japanese intelligence officers brought Kiyumiya to a communications room. They played recordings of Navajo code talker transmissions. They ordered him to translate. Kiumia listened carefully. He heard Navajo words he recognized, but the message made no sense. He heard words like Wullachi, meaning ant. He heard Beshlo, meaning ironfish. But strung together, these words formed no coherent message. What Kiumia couldn't know was that these were code words. Wullachi was the letter A. Beshlo meant submarine. Without training in the code, even a fluent Navajo speaker couldn't decode the messages. He told his captors the truth. The words were Navajo, but the message was gibberish. The Japanese didn't believe him. They tortured him. They stripped him naked and forced him to stand in deep snow until his feet froze to the ground. This incident demonstrated the code's brilliance perfectly. Even a fluent Navajo speaker who wasn't trained in the code couldn't break it. After the war, Lieutenant General Saiso Arisue, Japan's chief of intelligence, confirmed what many had suspected. Japanese cryptographers had broken numerous American codes throughout the war, but they never broke the Marine Corps code. They never even came close. By war's end, approximately 400 Navajo men had served as code talkers. 13 were killed in action. They served with all 6 Marine divisions. Their contribution was immeasurable. But when they came home in 1945 and 1946, there were no parades, no public recognition. They were ordered to maintain absolute secrecy about their service. The Code Talker program remained classified. The military kept the code classified until 1968. The decision to keep the code classified for 23 years had profound implications. The Code Talkers couldn't speak about their service. They couldn't share their experiences with anyone outside the Code Talker community. Even when the program was declassified in 1968, public recognition came slowly. The Code Talkers themselves rarely discussed their service. Many suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Gradually, recognition grew. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. In 2001, President George W. Bush presented gold medals to the 4 surviving members of the original 29. President Bush's remarks captured the significance of their achievement perfectly. We recall a story that all Americans can celebrate and every American should know. It is a story of ancient people called to serve in a modern war. It is a story of the only unbreakable oral code of World War II. Above all, it is a story of young Navajos who brought honor to their nation and victory to their country. The Navajo Code Talkers faced a bitter irony. Many had attended government boarding schools where they were punished for speaking Navajo. American education policy sought to eliminate Native American languages and cultures. Yet in World War II, America needed these languages desperately. The Code Talkers were asked to use the language they had been punished for speaking. They served anyway. This reflected a profound patriotism that transcended past injustices. When they returned home after the war, many struggled to access veterans' benefits. The reservation infrastructure did not support the GI Bill programs that transformed post-war America for white veterans. Yet their legacy transformed American military communications forever. The success of the Navajo Code Talkers proved that linguistic security could be as effective as technological security. Their story became a powerful symbol of Native American patriotism. Despite centuries of broken treaties, forced relocations, and discrimination, Native Americans have served in every American war at rates higher than any other ethnic group. Chester Nez, the last of the original 29 Code Talkers, passed away on June 4, 2014, at age 93. The mathematical impact of the Code Talkers is difficult to quantify, but undeniably significant. Tens of thousands of messages transmitted with 0 errors over 3 years of combat. Communication speeds increased from 30 minutes to 20 seconds. Perfect security against an enemy that had cracked virtually every other American code. At Iwo Jima alone, the 6 Code Talkers working the first 48 hours transmitted information that directly affected the survival of thousands of Marines. The Code Talkers' achievement demonstrated something profound about human intelligence and cultural knowledge. The most sophisticated cryptographic machines of that era couldn't match the security provided by human language and memory. The legacy of the Code Talkers extends far beyond their World War II service. They changed how America views its indigenous peoples. They demonstrated that Native American languages and cultures were assets, not liabilities. Today, fewer than 200,000 people speak Navajo. The language faces significant challenges, but the legacy of the Code Talkers has inspired efforts to preserve and teach the Navajo language. The Code Talkers transformed their language from a liability in American eyes into one of the nation's most valuable military assets. They proved that indigenous knowledge has power. They showed that diversity strengthens rather than weakens national defense. The Navajo Code Talkers left Japanese code breakers baffled. They gave American forces a decisive advantage. They saved countless lives and helped win the war. And they accomplished it all by speaking the language of their people, the language that proved unbreakable when their nation needed it most.